I needed to replace some of the hardware on my toilet, so it was at Home Depot, and I bought this. I was just going to buy the little bolts right there that connect the tank to the toilet, the two bolts. And the guy said, hey, why don't you just basically not upgrade, but repair your whole toilet and buy this kit. So it was about $30 or something like that. So the instructions were not very good for the flush valve, which is the tube in the middle with the white tube and then the flapper, and then the fill valve, which is the big black and yellow thing on the left. So I just wanted to do a little video on this. So the reason I had to do buy this stuff was there was a leak. It's an old toilet. The bolt, this is the tank, there's the toilet. The tank is attached to the toilet through two bolts that fit through the tank, and they have rubber gaskets that keep the water from leaking from the tank into the the house. But this tank and toilet is pretty old, so it was dripping. So I needed to replace the gaskets. So when I got rid of the water, I turned off way down the bottom there. There's the water supply. Turned off the water supply, flushed it, drained it, cleaned it all out. I found that the bolts I just could not get out. They were absolutely old and gungy, and here they are here. So what I wound up doing was there's where that's the bolt, the top of the bolt, the slotted bolt in the tank. You can see the rubber gasket around the outside that keeps the water in. They were just so bad they wouldn't even turn. So I bought a hacksaw like this and just reached underneath the tank and I cut the bolts right off of the tank, and then the tank came off and I replaced it. I did try some things. I tried Mr. Wrench, penetrating oil, etc. That didn't work, so I went and bought this kit and I just installed it. I wanted to do a little video on the instructions because they, like I said, trying to figure this thing out, especially these parts there. That's the fill valve and then the flush valve. Not very clear. All right, just a little primer on how toilets work might help with the repairs. So this is the fill valve, that's the flush valve. These, there's gaskets on the bottom of both that fit into the bottom of the tank, keep the water from leaking out of the tank. When you flush, what you're doing is pulling a lever that opens this flapper, they call it, the aptly named flapper. It goes up, water from the tank pours into the toilet and it flushes the toilet. Then as the water level recedes in the tank, the flapper shuts and then water comes up from here, from the back of your toilet into what they call the fill valve, and it goes in here and then it goes back out this small hose or tube, and then it keeps the water level goes up, and then it turns off because there's this float inside the tank, which you've all seen before. But that float, as the water level rises, it pushes the float up until it can't go any further, and it can't go any further because it's stopping the water flow over here in the fill valve. Okay, so it's this. Use my other hand. It's this action that's stopping it. So open, closed, and the water stops. The new one that I'm going to show you, it doesn't use this ball anymore. It looks like there's a small bucket that just rises up and then does the same job as the ball. And this is the overflow valve. So basically, the level of your water tank relates to how high you want it. If you're very environmentally friendly, eco-friendly, you probably want a low fill level, like to use less water. If you don't care about that, you set the water level quite high and you get a good flush. What happens is the ball will be below, the water level will be below the overflow valve, and that's there as it's a risk prevention tool, I guess. If something were to go wrong and the water would just keep filling, well, the water would get up to here and then go into the overflow valve and then flow out through the toilet. Now your toilet would run until you notice this, but it doesn't overflow and to damage your home. Okay. All right, that's basically how a toilet works. So I've installed this already, and what I wanted to do a video on was just some of the very unclear instructions from the manual. So down there, they talk about twist and adjust the refill valve. or whatever. But not very clear at all. So what they're getting at is down here, there's this yellow ring. You twist that ring, and then once you twist it, I'll see if I can do it here. Yeah, you twist it and the ring falls off. Then you can adjust the height of the valve. I'm not going to do it because I've already got it in. But you basically just pull up and down. It's that little pipe right there. It'll come in and out of the top part of the fill valve, and you adjust it to the height you want. You could make this low if you want to reduce the amount of water that you're flushing with. Set it low, and if you want to set it high, I've got mine, pretty high. Just extend the base, and then that little yellow clip just comes back up, and it clips in and it holds the thing in place. And the way this works, by the way, I think you're probably familiar with the big ball that floats and it lifts up with the water level and it turns off the refill. All this does, this happens inside of this little bucket right here. So I imagine it's got, I don't know, styrofoam, or maybe it floats all by itself. But the water level will rise up, and then eventually it'll push this little gray bucket up, and that'll close the water refill. The other part that was unclear was they talk about keeping this an inch. I think it's in the instruction. I think it said higher than this. But if you look at the picture and if you look at your existing toilet, I think you'll find that this overflow valve is higher than this. So this overflow hose was actually too high for my toilet. So I got the height of the refill up about as high as I could. It looks low now, but it's actually almost flush with the roof of the water tank. And then I basically just had this hose come over and go into the refill, and right where it came in, I cut this tube down, so it's now about 2 inches below my tank, and it's about an inch higher than the top of this. The instructions, I think, said this should be lower than this, but then it's totally different than the picture on the outside. It's different to how my current installation is, so I'm just going to go with this. Here's the bottom. Don't put the gasket here because the tank will sit up too high, and this little tube here needs to press into the gasket. So what you want to do is put the gasket on here and then nestle it into the hole. This wasn't. It's if you know what you're doing, DIY-ish, you'll get this in a second. But the instructions don't really tell you. But basically, you need a rubber gasket or washer gasket on the outside, followed by a washer, followed by this nut. Then the threaded bolt will fit through the hole, and it comes with a couple fly nuts that you fit in from the bottom, right? Before you put the toilet back into its spot, pour a little bit of water, enough water to cover the four seals. So the one there on the fill valve, one on the refill, and then the two bolts. And just check underneath and make sure that nothing is dripping. So I'm just going to feel. It feels good. That's good. I'll just go underneath. And yeah, that feels dry. Nothing leaking there. That's good. There's the fill valve. That's good. And then the other bolts. Okay, all three feel good. And then you've got the lever. I'm not replacing it because I like the color, and I just did this a few years ago, so I don't need the new one. Just one thing to point out is that contrary to almost every bolt and screw in the world, these bolts on toilets are not righty-tighty. They're lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. So just so you know, so when you're tightening, you don't turn clockwise, you turn counterclockwise. So righty-loosey, lefty-tighty, right? If that makes sense. And then I think this is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to talk too much about that. You just size the flapper chain so that it lines up properly with the lever, and then there's a little hook that comes with it. I think that should be quite straightforward. And then also you've noticed I've got the water in here. I was testing the water tightness. Make sure you don't accidentally lift the flapper, because water will pour onto your floor in this case, because I don't have this thing installed yet, so be careful of that. If you're doing this, you probably know what you're doing, but there's a wax ring that you need to replace down there. I just did this toilet a few years ago, so that ring is actually still pretty good. I'm going to keep that. If you do need to replace it, just get a scraper, scrape it up. If you want to get very particular, you could wipe it clean with a cloth, and then you lay a new wax ring on top, and then you plop the toilet on the bottom, or sorry, on the top, and the wax ring just compresses and keeps the water from coming from the toilet and seeping out around the edges. All right, so I've got the toilet mounted on top of the hole in the wax ring. I'm not going to show, but you would obviously just reconnect bolts onto those, thread bolts or thread nuts onto the bolts, and then you would want to reconnect the water supply down here. The kit came with a new connector for the fill valve. It's pretty standard stuff. So my existing braided valve to the water supply already had a fitted connector, so I didn't need to replace anything there. So now I'm going to turn this on and just see if everything works. I'm going to go slow. All right, so there's the water coming in. So far so good. I'm going to turn it up, and there the water, I guess, comes in from the top and then filters down. I'm going to turn up the speed. So far so good. I'm feeling the valve down below just to make sure there's no water coming out of that. So far so good. You might need to replace those valves. The valves, if you've got an older toilet, they tend to fail. And I highly recommend the SharkBite valve fittings. They're fantastic. You don't need to have a pincher, crimper. All right, so I'm going to turn this off and restart when it's full. Okay, so it filled up, and as I said before, this bucket just floated up and turned off the water. If I push it down, the water should start. There it goes, and it just turns off automatically. This is the overflow valve. So if something goes wrong, if the water fill valve malfunctions, what'll happen is the water will fill up and then just go over the top. So you want the overflow valve to be higher than this by like an inch, okay? Just, because you don't want, obviously, when the water's filling up, you don't want the overflow valve to come into play. You want it to be a safety mechanism. Let's see if this works. Oh, I haven't connected the chain yet. I'll just pull this by hand. Just check down there. Okay. No water, no drips. That water down there is from my hand. Okay. Okay, that's it. Good luck.